There are three things that I find incredibly interesting in the modern age that we live today. The first is neuroscience, the study of the brain and the mind, which is changing extremely rapidly. The second is cosmology and astronomy, or where the universe came from and how it developed and what's out there. And the third is anthropology and how we came about to be where we are now and where we came from. And recently there's been some discoveries from the first Americans, or the first Native Americans, that came to the Western Hemisphere. Prior to these people, there were no humans here. It's not like in Africa where you had human type people for hundreds of thousands of years. Humans are a relatively recent addition to the Western Hemisphere in the North and South America. It had been thought up until the last few years that the first settlers came approximately 10,000 years ago, and that has been pushed back by an additional 3 or 4 or 5,000 years by some recent discoveries in the Pacific coastal regions of the United States, of people that came in what appears to be some 15,000 years ago and possibly as old as 25,000 years ago. The problem with finding more information on these people is that they left very few remains, very few tools, for instance, and the water levels arose since the Ice Age. The glaciers melted and the sea level rose, so many of the potential sites that they had, whether they were campsites or little settlements, are now underwater and potentially gone forever. But a few of these sites have been found. And so the best guess now is that these people came between 15 and 25,000 years ago. And they possessed what obviously was an incredible ability to adapt to new environments and continually changing conditions. You'd have to remember that if you're the first settler, say in coastal Canada or coastal United States, Washington, Oregon, and California now, you couldn't go back east to St. Louis or to find civilization, or you couldn't go to Mexico City, for instance, if you were in coastal Mexico. There was no cities. In fact, the only people you could go back to might be some other settlers that were behind you. And so these people possessed an incredible degree of resiliency, an incredible degree of skills that allowed them to develop and to settle this part of the world. And they predated the Olmecs, which is considered to be the original group of Indians in Mexico, Native Americans in Mexico, indigenous peoples. The Olmecs were approximately 7,000, maybe 8,000 years ago. And so the first settlers were maybe 7,000 or 8,000 years before that. And these early settlers obviously didn't build cities. The Olmecs were probably some of the first groups or tribes that actually built cities and towns because of the agriculture, like in other parts of the world. But in the Olmecs, if you are fascinating people, if you look at some of the videos that I've done from a place called La Menta, which is in the state of Tabasco in Mexico, you can see the amazing sort of degree of artisanship and how far that culture and civilization actually developed, basically isolated from everything. And it was from the Olmecs that it's thought that the Maya developed, and other groups of Indians or Native Americans from indigenous peoples from Mexico came from the Olmecs. And so the people we're talking about, talking about today, were predated them by 7, 10, maybe 15,000 years, incredibly remote. And what it basically shows, I think, is that they either came by land, or more probably now, as we know, by boat. What kind of people could actually come long distances, leave everything behind, and knowing that they would probably never go back, and then generation after generation continue to push down into further regions, all the way through Mexico, Central America, down into South America, and all the way to Chile now, in a period of maybe 1,000 or 2,000 years. Incredible people, incredibly courageous, and it's pretty well determined now, particularly with the DNA studies, the genetic studies, and molecular studies from current day indigenous peoples, that that was in fact the case, that they did come from Asia. They did go vast distances and were absolutely the truest adventurers probably ever, because they're, until we go to another world perhaps or colonize the moon, they will be the ones that actually were the foremost frontier people and the foremost adventurers. And we should all maybe just think for a minute of what kind of person or what kind of people could actually do that and settle the new world. Incredible thing to think about.